I always liked writing. New journalism was always something I thought about potentially pursuing. Eventually, I went to Niagara College, which is like a 2-year program in Southern Ontario. It's very streamlined. It's very hands-on. Um, the first year you're kind of just writing mock articles and learning kind of I don't know, different tips and tricks of the trade. And then the second year, you just take over running the campus newspaper. So it was very kind of practical oriented, which I found helpful. After I graduated from Niagara College in 2017, the summer of 2017, where I had done a bit of investigative work there, particularly one or two kind of bigger investigations towards in my second year at J school. But after I graduated, I got a 6-week like internship or placement at the Hamilton Spectator, and I was quite lucky that I did a little bit of daily news there, but they also just freed me up to do an investigative project of my choice. So we did kind of a 6-week deep dive into drug use in the city's high schools, which was a bit difficult to report out because teenagers aren't often super forthcoming or wanting to talk about those sorts of issues. But so I did that, and then after that internship wrapped up, I applied to an internship at the Winnipeg Free Press. As far as I could tell at that point in time, it seemed to be one of the best internships remaining in Canadian newspapers, in the sense that it was full-time. You were paid the same as an entry-level reporter was, so the pay was quite good compared to a lot of other internships, and that it lasted the entirety of the summer. And what I realized when I got there was that they do 5 interns a summer at my newspaper, and they kind of just push you into the deep end of the pool and see if you'll sink or swim. So you're expected kind of as soon as you come in the door to operate like any other general assignment reporter would. So I did that internship. After that, they had signaled to me that they wanted to bring me on staff. They just simply didn't have the resources at that moment. But I had an editor who had city desk editor, kind of took me under his wing a little bit. So he kicked me as much freelance work as he could for the time being, until eventually I got a 6-month contract. And then from a 6-month contract, they eventually brought me on staff. So kind of over an extended period of time, I was able to work up from an intern to a regular freelance contributor to a contract worker to eventually being on staff. I've now been at the paper for about 4 years. I think it's a little bit 4.5 years at this point since I started as an intern. My work there has, I certainly put in a fair amount of time as a GA, just a general assignment reporter. So just whatever might need covering on any given day, they'll kick it over to you. So one day you might be down at City Hall helping fill in. Next day you might be covering a crime or going to a police press conference. Someday it might be, some sort of bright or like, just kind of a happier story about something that might be going on in the community. So it's a good way to get your start, I think, because it teaches you to be quite versatile as a reporter. But eventually I kind of fell into the crime beat. That was my main focus at the newspaper for quite some time. And it was a couple of years where Winnipeg had record-setting homicide rates. And so it's just a lot of homicide coverage, a lot of violent assaults. Winnipeg is a city that has an elevated crime rate, a lot of issues around poverty and addiction as well that helps feed into that. So that was kind of my focus for a bit. But I was always interested in investigative journalism. It was something that when I was in J school, I felt like I had a knack for it. I managed to pull off a couple of pretty good projects when I was still in school. I thought if I was ever given the chance, I could be good at it. So eventually what I started doing at the Free Press was that in my spare time, I would just start working on projects. And if I had an hour in my day, I would just pick away at some sort of long-term project that I had been developing, and sometimes even evenings and things like that. So first kind of investigative thing I did was it took me 8 months to put it together, and it was an investigation into what's known as the Independent Investigation Unit of Manitoba. It's the civilian-led police oversight agency that is supposed to investigate whenever there's accusations of wrongdoing against law enforcement officers. And through 8 months, heavily relying on freedom of information requests and able to getting like hundreds and hundreds of internal correspondence between the IIU, it's the shorthand for it, and the Winnipeg Police Service, I was able to expose some pretty serious shortfalls in both the IIU and how it operates, and also the Police Services Act, which is the legislation in Manitoba that governs police oversight and accountability. I've continued to do other investigative work. Probably what I'm most well known for is the Patrik Mathews case, which was in the summer of 2019. There was a neo-Nazi recruitment campaign that had started, it popped up in Winnipeg, and trying to figure out how to best get to the bottom of who this was, how concerning it should be, what exactly was going on here. I ended up infiltrating the group. I discovered that their local member was a member of the Canadian military who had explosives training. He was a combat engineer in the reserves, and a master corporal. So he also had a leadership role, but he was moonlighting as a neo-Nazi and participating in paramilitary training camps. And so after we at the Free Press exposed him, he ended up fleeing the country. He, ran away to the United States, hooked up with a bunch of other neo-Nazis down there, plotted some violence, stockpiled guns and ammunition. And last week he was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. And then that's now the subject of a podcast series that just came out called White Hot Hate from the CBC, which we partnered up with them to do. And then the other kind of, I guess, more investigative stuff I've done was largely around the Peter Nygard case. Peter Nygard's a Canadian fashion mogul, I guess you could say, a very wealthy individual, but at this point he's been accused of sexual violence and sexual misconduct by more than 50 women. And so I've spent a significant amount of time reporting that story out, I've reported from 3 different countries on the Peter Nygard case at this point, and he was later arrested by the FBI, and he's also been charged in Canada for sex trafficking and sexual assault and things of that nature. So those are kind of, I would say, some of the more career highlights, I guess, in terms of particularly the investigative work that I've done. I've been fortunate that now I've been at my newspaper. I've been taken off daily news entirely. So I only do kind of long form feature writing and investigative work now. I'm lucky to work at a place that still funds that, because it's not cheap and it's time consuming. And the reality is, in the newspaper business these days, or in journalism more broadly, not everyone is still funding that kind of work. So I'm lucky to work somewhere that does. But in my experience, this isn't the first kind of J class I've spoken to. I usually find these things are best when you keep it conversational. I'm sure, I'd be happy to ramble on and on about journalism or whatever, but it's usually, I think, best to, open it up to questions and see if there's anything in particular someone wants to ask about. If it's any of the stories that I've worked on, I'm happy to get into that. If it's, just skills or tricks I've learned as a reporter more generally, happy to get into that too. Or if it's about navigating the industry and how to go about trying to get yourself established in it, I can also answer questions on that topic. So yeah, what do you think, Shawn? Is it good to maybe open it up to questions? Or I think you're muted.
Yes, Ryan, that's always a good idea, to open it up to questions to a journalism class. So guys, what are your questions for Ryan?
Hi, so you said that when you were in J school, you had a knack for investigative journalism. Why do you think that was the case? Did you grow up liking investigative journalism?
I grew up really liking writing. I always wanted to be a novelist, and I always figured that journalism, maybe that's a way I can pay my bills writing while I work on these other projects. Then I went to J school and I realized I was just as passionate, if not maybe even more so, about nonfiction than I always traditionally had been about fiction. And so, I mean, first thing I did back then was I've always tried to be learning even when I was outside the classroom. So I bought a bunch of books, famous journalism books. And I think one of the first ones I probably bought was All the President's Men. And it's such a compelling, it's a classic, but it's such a compelling read because it reads like a spy thriller, except of course it's all true. So maybe that's where the interest in investigative reporting first came in, was kind of reading the work of some of like the great investigative reporters of the past little bit. I got really interested in the work of Cy Hirsch, who broke the My Lai massacre out of Vietnam. He broke Abu Ghraib out of Iraq. And he was the New York Times guy on Watergate, who was always getting scooped by Bernstein and Woodward. But so, yeah, kind of familiarizing myself with the work of investigative journalists definitely, piqued my interest in it more. And then I got the opportunity to do some of that work at J School. The first came, I was tasked essentially as the editor on like a team project that looked at student mental health in Canadian post-secondary campuses. It wasn't like, I guess it wasn't strict investigative reporting, but there were some investigative aspects to it. And I really enjoyed that process. And then right before I left, there was a string of violent home invasions surrounding the campus that I went to in Welland. And so I started investigating what was going on. And it turned out that they were all connected to this property owner who owned a bunch of like student housing in the area, who, didn't have the best standards and was knowingly kind of allowing people to sell drugs out of his home. And it was bringing crime into this area around our campus. And a couple of people got hurt. And so I was able to track down victims and, put together statements and develop some sources on that. It was one of the pieces I was probably most proud of when I was in J School. So after I finished that project, I kind of left J School thinking that, I had the ability to do this kind of work, and that if I ever got the opportunity to in my career, that I thought I could be good at it. I thought I could do it well, but at that point in time, I didn't expect to, a few years later, to be doing investigative work full time. I was mostly concerned about getting a job. And despite the fact I had done quite well in J School, I was terrified entering the industry that I was going to be unemployed or have to do something else. That didn't happen, but yes, I think that's where my interest in it stemmed from.
One thing that we've heard from like our textbook, we talked to Victor Malarek a few weeks ago. There's often a lot of tension between investigative journalists and their bosses. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, mostly not. I don't currently. I think good reporters are by their nature kind of, probably tough to deal with, particularly good like investigative reporters. You have to be fairly independent minded. I think kind of as a general disposition, you probably are more skeptical of authority. And so I think, yeah, we're probably somewhat, we're not the easiest folks in the newsroom to manage. The biggest conflict with my editors that I ever had was before I was doing investigative reporting full time. Sometimes I would get a news tip and I knew it could be like a really good story, or I knew I just needed a few days to really flesh it out. And you take it to an editor and say, hey, I need the next week to work on this. And they say, hey, we've got a paper to put out tomorrow, so you need to turn it around in the next 5 hours or something. And then, you're doing more kind of incremental piecemeal reporting, which sometimes that's the correct way, even with investigative stuff. Sometimes that's the correct way to handle a story. You have to go with what you have. And then by virtue of publishing on a certain topic, sources and people start coming out of the woodwork and feeding you information. And it's more like a death by 1,000 cuts. But sometimes the correct play is to hold it back. Don't tip your hand. Don't let anyone know you're working into this, so that you can effectively go about making connections with people. So I used to sometimes butt heads with editors when they would want to publish right away, when I thought something needed to be kind of left on the back burner for a little bit longer. But now I don't at all. I only work with one editor at the Free Press. He's the best editor I've ever come across during my time in this industry. And and they kind of let me, they trust my instincts when I think something needs to be, needs a little bit more time before we're ready to print. So, I don't have that anymore, but I've certainly, gotten into fierce arguments with editors in the past.
Maybe just as more of like a general question. I was reading through your articles on Patrik Mathews, and I just like kind of wondered how, I guess, like when you decided to infiltrate this group, how did you get yourself into that mindset? Because I imagine it'd be quite difficult to infiltrate a group so full of hate without having the kind of hatred that they have. And how did you kind of work through that experience? Was it, I mean, I guess it would be like, if it was me, I'd be scared, right? So how did you kind of balance, knowing that you were going into a situation that's potentially dangerous and that they have all of these ideological hatreds while doing good investigative reporting and keeping yourself safe at the same time?
Yeah, so at first, I didn't really know anything about this group. I'd done some reporting on the far right in the past, some organizing efforts in Manitoba, recruitment campaign out of Brandon University, and a demonstration in Winnipeg in 2018. And so I had some familiarity with the far right, but certainly not a ton. I wasn't an expert by any means. And then when I heard about this group that was now had a recruitment drive in Winnipeg called The Base, I didn't know anything about them. The only information I could find came from two buddies of mine, well, buddies now, at Vice, Ben and Mac, who kind of do a lot of their reporting on the far right, and they do really good work. And they had done an expose in 2018, shortly after this organization was founded. And after I read their work, it became very clear that this was far more concerning and potentially violent and frankly terroristic in nature than anything we had seen locally. So that certainly upped my level of concern in terms of the threat this could potentially pose to the community. At first, ultimately why I decided to take the approach I did was I just went down to an editor and I said, like, look, I could treat this like a straight news story. I could turn it around for tomorrow's paper. I'd contact the Winnipeg Police Service, see if they're tracking these recruitment posters or aware of them. I would go to, there's one academic in particular in Winnipeg who specializes in kind of the history of fascism and neo-fascism. And so I could go to him and get an interview. I could reach out to some community groups and ask them if they, were concerned or aware about this. And you could, put that together very quickly, but it would have been limited in terms of what we actually know about what's going on here. I figured the only real way to get insight into, is there a lot of members? Is there one member? Is this a gag? Is the person putting up these posters all that serious about it? The only way to do it would be to approach them. So my editor did that. And at first I was just communicating with them via email. And so it was difficult in the sense that I didn't know a lot about this particular worldview, and I had to do simultaneous research so that I could, convincingly portray myself as a like-minded individual. So that was difficult. I wasn't really worried about safety concerns at that point. They didn't know who I was. I wasn't meeting these people. The only time I got scared, and I did get scared beforehand, was when I was going to meet their local recruiter in person in Winnipeg. And I didn't know, who this individual was. I didn't know what kind of situation I was walking into. I didn't know if I was going to be able to be convincing, because up until that point, if I can't think of something on email, I can just take 5 minutes, go research it, come back, write something up that'll be convincing. Even when I'd spoken to them on the phone, I would always pre-write notes and scripts and kind of lay them out on my desk so I could look down at the page if I couldn't think of something to say. The in-person meeting was far more of a test. So that was certainly nerve-wracking. And I think maybe one other thing that comes to mind is that, it was very dark. It was a very dark kind of month of my life, or whatever, how long this lasted, just because I was surrounded by all this vitriol and hate, a lot of the day, which was, not necessarily easy to see. I think the thing for me was I had tried to present myself to this group as something more of an intellectual. I had read all the theory and I could talk about it that way. And that way I didn't have to be so, I didn't use any sort of racial epithets or use the same type of language that a lot of these people were, just because I wasn't comfortable doing it. So I tried to find a different avenue, a different way to make myself seem like an attractive recruit to this organization. It was mostly just a lot of research. I had to read a lot of weird, obscure, racist, neo-Nazi screeds to be able to know the types of things that these people believe.
Is it stressful doing this type of work? Are you worried that something could come back from that work, from that investigation?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has been stressful at various points in time. I knew I had to take some safety precautions during the investigative process. I had to take safety precautions afterwards. Before publication, I had to like go to my family and say like, hey, I need you guys to lock down all of your like online social media presence because like these people harass your family too. So that wasn't fun. I mean, at one point, the National Security Unit of the RCMP pulled me into a meeting and were like, we're presenting you written notification that we're aware of death threats and stuff like that. So like here, you're formally notified. And it's like, they wouldn't give me any information, but it struck me as them being like, we've given you notification. So if something bad happens to you, we can't be sued because we've notified you. So that was all, certainly stressful. The main thing about investigative work, not just this story. I mean, this story had particular stressors associated with it due to the safety concerns. Most of the time with investigative reporting that I've done, I'm not so much worried about safety concerns. I'm worried about getting something wrong. And because of the nature of investigative reporting, where you're kind of like casting out into the dark a little bit, and you have to have almost maybe like a degree of hubris in the sense that you think you can get at what's actually going on, particularly something that someone else doesn't want known or made public. And it's easy to get things wrong. And you have to be able to make sure you're properly sourced up on things, or that you've got the correct information, or there's not some important missing piece of context, that would totally change how you're looking at the evidence that's in front of you. And so I get very stressed out around times of publication and get quite anxious, just worried that, is there something I screwed up here? Is there something I'm missing? The only way to really deal with that is to try and be as careful as you can doing the work, and to hopefully have a good editor over your shoulder, making sure that, catching some of your mistakes so you don't look like an idiot after it's published. Yeah, I mean, so the Mathews case, there were safety concerns, and that was stressful. With the other investigative work that I've done, or I continue to do, the stress is usually just like, have I got this right? Because it's particularly if you're making an accusation of some sort, it's like those have repercussions, and you can mess up someone's life if you're wrong. And journalism isn't a business of second chances. You commit one of the cardinal sins and you're done. Your career's over. So that can be stressful.
I'm wondering, do most of your investigations start as tips that you received? How are you knowing where to look?
Yeah, sometimes they start as tips. That's one thing. After you've had a little bit of success, people start coming to you. So at this point in my career, I've done enough successful kind of investigative work that I think locally in Winnipeg, or people in Manitoba who follow the news, now know if there's something kind of that nature, or something that you think an investigative reporter should look at. A lot of people will just come to me. And so that's kind of a benefit I have as someone that's a little more established. But they don't always. I mean, the first kind of investigation I did in my career was on like this police oversight agency. And because I was doing a lot of crime reporting, anytime there was a press release from this agency, I would be asked to write it up into a brief, or potentially flesh it out into a story. And just over the course of about a year and a half, I kept thinking, man, there's like no cops being charged. Like there's all these accusations against them, and there's very, very few charges. And I wonder what's going on here. And so it was kind of me just, and it didn't mean, I mean, maybe there shouldn't have been charges. It was just a question I had, that it seems like you would think after a while, eventually there would be a charge, and I wasn't seeing any. And so, I started going through public documents, and okay, well, let's go back as far back into the records show and track how many investigations has this agency done, and how many times have the police refused to sit down for an interview or turn over their notes, and how many times have officers been charged. And let's tally up some statistics. Let's talk about people who are involved in crafting the legislation that led to the creation of this organization. So sometimes you just notice patterns. And the other thing that's big for me, and this isn't my advice, I picked this up reading Seymour Hersh's memoir, which is just called Reporter. It's quite good. but his big advice was read before you write. And so I always try and read a lot. And like I did a lot of investigative work into prisons in Manitoba this past summer, and how one of them started was, again, it was just like I was noticing these trends. CSC, Correctional Services Canada, particularly at Stony Mountain Institution, which is the lone federal prison in Manitoba on the outskirts of Winnipeg, there was a lot of inmates dying. They kept putting out these press releases with no information of another inmate dead. And eventually it was like, why is there so many deaths happening here? And like, what's going on? And this seems odd and concerning. So the first thing I did was I got every inquest report that had been published into a death in Stony Mountain Institution for the past 20 years. It was probably over 1,000 pages. And I spent Monday to Friday, 1 week, reading every inquest report related to this prison of the past 20 years. And by the time I had done that, I had a pretty good sense of what had been going on and like why deaths had been happening, and the recommendations for changes that were being asked for so that they wouldn't stop happening, and the fact that those recommendations weren't being followed. And so sometimes as a kind of a close consumer and observer of different institutions in your community and of the news more broadly, you kind of just pick up on these trends. And then I would also say, read public record documents. There's a great old investigative reporter whose name was I.F. Stone, and this was his bread and butter. This is why he was so good, was that he would do the tedious, time-consuming work of reading public record documents that no one else would. And so he would come across this information, because there's so much information out there that no one bothers to look at, unless you're like some policy nerd or, like an academic maybe. There's a lot of public record documents no one's paying attention to. A lot of journalists aren't paying attention to because they don't have the time. They're on tight daily deadlines, and so they can't spend the time looking into these things. And so there's a wealth of information out there in public record documents if you'll take the time to sit down and go through them.
Hey, Ryan, just kind of going in that direction. How much does open source investigation or investigating kind of help you in your stories?
For me, not a ton, because I'm not particularly tech savvy. That's something I had a data guy at the Free Press. He just left actually and took a different job, but he would sometimes do some of that stuff. And that's another thing. Like if you have skills as a reporter, if you have data skills, then like that's an incredible tool to have in your toolbox. I'm lucky in the sense that I got to work with someone with data skills and someone who would do open source kind of investigative stuff from time to time. I mean, the only time in my career that's come up at all is during the Patrik Mathews case, because even though I was the one who broke it out of Winnipeg, eventually it became such big news that like there was a lot of different people chasing it. There was a lot of online activity associated with these kind of far right groups, and there was also a lot of anti-fascist activists who invested a lot of time over a lot of years tracking these sorts of movements and ideologies, and so it kind of came up a little bit there, but other than that, it hasn't played a huge role in the work I've done in my career.
How many articles are you writing on a monthly basis these days?
It varies. I think usually I would want 2 to 3 a month. It kind of depends. Sometimes something might come up as a part of an ongoing project. Like this past week, there was 2 court proceedings in the wrap up of the Patrik Mathews case. So when I was covering those, it started as like kind of like a long form investigation. But by that point in the story, I'm just covering court hearings. So those are just like quick 1-day turnaround stories. So I filed 2 articles on that last week. I've got a feature article in the works that'll hopefully run next week, and another example of getting tips, like because I did a lot of reporting on Stony Mountain Institution, the prison in Manitoba, over the course of the summer. right before I went down to the States to cover the final Mathews hearing, I got another tip about like a very serious incident that happened in there by an employee, because now I've kind of established myself as, okay, well, if you're on the inside at Stony Mountain and you think there's something that needs to come to the public's attention, like this is the reporter you go to. And so I've got something in the works on that. I don't have a quota or anything like that, but generally speaking, I will have conversations with my editor, once a month, once every couple of weeks, where it's like, okay, this is the kind of short to medium term priority or the thing that we're working on together. And then here's a list of a few other topics that are more of our long-term priority that, we've already talked about. What are we going to get into in the new year after I come back from my December vacation? So I try to have lots of different irons in the fire, I guess, a lot of different things on my to-do list, even if I'm only focusing on one or two at a time. And then, in terms of a monthly thing, 2 to 3 articles. I mean, I mostly, everything I write at this point, probably, 85% of what I write, it's like 4,000 to 5,000 words in length. It's all just, it's running in long form. So yeah, I mean, two kind of long features like that a month with maybe a shorter article mixed in is probably what my output is at this point. But I can remember the days when I was a GA and I was filing 4 pieces of copy, 5 pieces of copy in a day sometimes, and I just felt like I was being run off my feet. So it's kind of night and day compared to then. But yeah, it depends on the story, how much time it needs, how important we think it is, how much time and energy we're willing to invest into it. Sometimes a story might come up and they'll say, okay, we'll clear your month for this, and just focus on this and you'll get it if it's important enough. But yeah, it varies month to month.
What do you think is the most important skill for journalism students to cultivate while they're still in school?
One thing I kind of mentioned this, but one thing that I always tried to do when I was in J school was learn outside the classroom. And so I would encourage you to do that. If this is what you want to do, and this is really what you want to pursue, then yeah, like always try and be learning, always trying to be consuming good news. I mean, that's another way you can get story ideas. Like I read the New York Times, and sometimes I'll see something that the New York Times did, and it's like, oh shit, well, that's cool. Like, how can I do that in Winnipeg? How can I take these bigger stories from these impressive publications and transfer them into a local context? But yeah, so like you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot. I mean, if that's the medium you want to work in. But yeah, consume a lot of good news, consume bad news too, and see how they screwed up and did it wrong. Try and read as much as you can. Try and I believe journalism's a craft. It's not like a profession. It's something that you can be trained to do. It's a set of skills. So I would say that. And then the big thing that I've noticed, I think with myself, and then also just seeing interns who have come into the paper after me, some of whom have been hired on, some of whom have not, some of whom have stuck in other areas in the industry, some of whom are, doing communications or something else now. It's like the people that I can usually tell now which ones are going to be successful, because there's the ones who are really passionate about it, and you can tell from the jump that like, okay, this isn't just like it's not just a job for them, it seems more like a vocation or a calling or something like that. And 2, you have to have like perseverance. When I was covering homicides, the main thing I would always do is, Winnipeg's cold and you're outside in the middle of winter, and it's just like, well, if every other news outlet is going to spend 2 hours at the scene, I'm going to spend 4. And if they're going to knock on 10 or 15 doors, I'm going to knock on 30 or 45. And that's how I'm going to find the person who saw something, or how I'm going to get some piece of information that's going to make my story better than the stories of all my competitors today. So having, some determination, I guess, and a willingness to really kind of go the extra mile, I think goes a long way when you're reporting on stories. And yeah, I don't know if those are a few thoughts.
Would you describe yourself as someone who likes to fight?
Like not physically, but I think I certainly have an oppositional mindset, probably, I suppose. And I'm a big believer in like critical coverage. I think that I don't know the media ecosystem all over the country, but particularly in Winnipeg, I think that there has been a lack of critical coverage with kind of an overwhelming deference to like traditional institutions of power in the city. And that's one thing that I've tried to do much differently in my work, which is probably why I've kind of gravitated to more investigative journalism. Because yeah, like my instinct is certainly always to question and to be suspicious. And like, for my background's on the crime beat for a lot of years, crime reporting, at least in this city, but I think this holds true in a lot of different places. They were practically stenographers for the cops. It was like police press releases were treated as gold, like that information was 100% above board all the time. And then you look at something like the George Floyd case, where you see that initial police press release that went out, and they described it in like the most bureaucratic, vague police speak that you can imagine, where it's like, oh, there's some sort of an altercation and an individual went into medical distress and no weapon was used and he subsequently died. But for the longest time, news outlets would run with that kind of stuff. And there would be a lack of, I guess, suspicion, not necessarily suspicion, but a lack of willingness to be like, okay, well, I'll take this, but you got to verify. We can't just take it as if this is 100% accurate, And at least in Winnipeg, I've been pushing that like we should be covering the police in the same way that we cover politicians at City Hall or the Manitoba legislature, because we're certainly suspicious of everything that comes out of the mouths of politicians at my newspaper. Why haven't we held that same kind of suspicion when it comes to statements that are coming from the police? And so, yeah, or you'll even see things like with the language games that they'll sometimes play, like things like officer involved shooting. It's like, well, what is that? I mean, officer involved shooting means police shot someone, but they use these kind of vague euphemisms to mask whatever is actually gone on here. And so I think I certainly have a tendency, or just like an innate disposition, to always be very questioning, which, I think that probably serves me well as a reporter.
How many hours are you working in an average week?
A lot. I'm probably like a workaholic. Yeah, a lot. I'm on salary, so I don't really, and I don't at this point, because I'm not on daily files anymore. It's not really like a 9-to-5 thing for me, and I've just been working from home throughout the pandemic. So it's like, I usually wake up early. I like writing early in the morning. That's when I get my best writing done. But then it's like, maybe I'll take a break for 45 minutes and make breakfast and sit and have a cup of coffee. And then maybe I'll do some reading. And then I take a break for like an hour at lunch. But like, so it's not as condensed as like a 9-to-5 gig is, but then it might be midnight some nights if I'm in the thick of an investigation. I'm reading inquest reports in my bed. So like it's yeah, my work schedule is like, it's a bit all over the place these days. Honestly, I prefer it that way. I kind of like to space it out and be able to pick it up and put it down as I see fit. But there's no doubt that, yeah, I put in, traditionally throughout my career, I put in a lot more hours than the 40 hours a week that technically on paper I do. And back when I was doing daily files, technically my shift was 9-to-5, and then we would publish, we call it Above the Fold. It's like our online magazine. It goes live at 7:00, and it's like the top stories of the day, and they get extra web presentation to make them look a little bit fancier and some extra photos and stuff. And so even though I was off at 5, it wouldn't be an uncommon occurrence for it to be 6:30, and I'd still be in the newsroom going over final edits with, a line editor for some story that was about to drop in 30 minutes. So in my experience, it's not always a 9 to 5 job. It can sometimes feel a little bit difficult to get away from, but at least for me, a lot of the time it doesn't feel like work. A lot of the time it's like, I can't believe people are paying me to do this. It feels like I'm getting one over on them or something. But yeah, it can be a lot of work.
Ryan, just I guess nowadays, a lot of people who can be considered, I guess, high-ranking members of society, like maybe, who like, for an example, like Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein or Epstein, can be caught up in like very shady and discriminating activities. In the case of the base, were you surprised by how many members were considered high-ranking members of society, like Army veterans, FBI agents, lawyers, all that sort of stuff?
I mean, the main thing with the base and it's like the base is a part of what I would call the neo-Nazi accelerationist movement, which might not mean much to folks who aren't like deep in the weeds on this like I am, but that's kind of like the portion of the far right that they're involved with. And the connections to the military were quite concerning. I vaguely kind of knew that there had been cases in Canada where military members had been exposed as being associated with the far right. Obviously, there was the Somalia affair in like 93 or 94, which was a huge scandal and a huge deal. But I didn't realize to what extent it was like this, and the fact that there had been an ongoing active effort from this organization and other organizations like it to either one, identify folks in the military that were potentially sympathetic or could be radicalized and bring them into their organizations, or two, take an already radicalized member of their organization who doesn't have military background but has a clean record with the police, send them into the military, particularly the reserves, because it's less of a full-time commitment, and then have them get that training so they can bring it back into the movement and share those skill sets with other neo-Nazis. So that was very concerning, and it was a surprise to me. But then I started doing broader research into the far right hate movement in North America, dating back to the 1970s. And what you've seen is that these connections with the military have been there for decades. It's nothing new. It was new to me, but it's nothing new. It's been an ongoing problem. There's usually an uptick in, there's academic research that shows there's usually an uptick in far right activity in the aftermath of wars, particularly failed wars. And the military has always had cross-pollination with these groups, which is not to say that the military is rife with extremists. It's not. We're talking about a small minority of the ranks of the military that hold these views, but like it's still a cause for concern, even if it's 0.5% or something like that. Even one is too many is the standpoint I would take. So that definitely, was a surprise to me. And then eventually, thanks to my colleague Jason Wilson, who was working at The Guardian, he exposed the founder of the base as this individual named Ronaldo Nazaro, living in St. Petersburg. And he has like these past murky ties to the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States. He was a military contractor during the Iraq War. So again, we see another one of those connections to the armed forces. So yeah, it was a surprise to me, but then the more I did research, the more I realized it's quite common and it's well documented at this point.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey Ryan, I have a question for you. During your investigation and kind of infiltration of the base, was there ever like a point where you kind of thought like maybe you were in over your head, or that like you were potentially in a life-threatening scenario where you might not make it out? And then like if you have like any advice for people who kind of want to get into potentially investigating like possible like dangerous situations or dangerous events. Do you have any like advice for them?
Yeah, yeah, a few different things. I remember one of my favorite comments from a local reader after we published that investigation was, Ryan Thorpe's either the most brave or courageous investigative reporter in the city or the stupidest. And it might have been a little bit of both. I always have an instinct. My instinct on stories is to always push it a little bit further. It's not the first time I've probably put myself in an unsafe situation for my work. I've done that, I think, on crime reporting in the past in a few different cases that I covered. And I'm not sure that's good advice, or that I should be telling, a group of young, folks who are interested in journalism, like, oh yeah, be like me and like push the envelope all the time. And, when you are scared, just like push that thought from your mind and keep going. I mean, that's what I try and do. And if I hadn't done that, the reporting into the base wouldn't have been successful, because I definitely had safety concerns. It's particularly in the lead up to that meeting with their recruiter. I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know what the hell was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to show up at the meeting spot and he would immediately tell him to hop in his vehicle and he was going to take me somewhere else. And there'd be even more, like, I didn't know. I was definitely scared. I felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants a little bit. And, and it was maybe a little in over my head. But I was also, I confident in my ability. I don't know. I figured like I'm a sharp guy and I think I can outwit some Nazis. So I just kind of kept pushing forward on the story. And also I was curious, and concerned for my community. I was concerned about a potential act of violence in my community. I was curious about like, who the heck is behind this recruitment campaign? And then I got suspicious that they might have connections to the military. And then it kind of just, at that point, it was like, okay, well, I have to get to the bottom of this, because if the person behind this is indeed connected to the military, like that's a huge deal and it needs to be exposed. So there was definitely a couple of moments where I was worried about, my safety, but I kind of just pressed forward on the story regardless.
To kind of continue with the base questions there, as you said, obviously it's a little easier communicating and getting your foot in the door through email or not face to face, as you can kind of glance down and look at notes. But when you did get to meet with that recruiter for the first time, if you can remember, what type of questions did he ask you, and what type of answers did you give him?
Well, so the meeting went, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but the meeting went differently than I expected it to. And the person I met in the park was different than the person I expected to meet, although I don't really know what I was expecting in a way. But it became pretty quick to me that this individual that I was meeting very early on into our meeting had a degree of trust that I was who I said I was. At this point in time, I had been kind of jumping through these hoops in this vetting process for about 2 weeks, and the other members of the organization had signed off on me. And this was kind of the final hurdle before I would be offered the chance to join up and become a member. And to, I'm sure his regret, he wasn't like peppering me with questions at that meeting. It was like 10 minutes in, and he's already saying, well, we're going to be working very closely together, so we can drop the pseudonyms and just use our real first names. And so by the time he offered to do that, I was no longer that concerned for my safety, because I didn't think this individual was suspicious of me. I had clearly been convincing enough up to that point throughout the entirety of the vetting process that this person thought I was a like-minded Confederate and was talking to me as if he thought I was a like-minded Confederate. So at that point in time, I wasn't too worried, but at least for my personal safety, but I increasingly got worried about the potential threat this individual posed to my community, because very quickly he's talking about acts of violence and he's spewing like racial hatred, and he's talking about like stringing up and hanging activists in the community. He's talking about derailing a train line. He's telling me that he's in the military, and he's trained as a combat engineer. And, keep in mind, at this point in time, it's like, I don't know if what this guy is saying is truthful. I can't take him at his word, but I certainly also can't dismiss him. It might have been possible that he was lying about being in the military to make himself seem like a, better potential soldier in the race war than he actually would be. But, I was very concerned about what he was saying. I remember leaving that meeting just thinking he's a fanatic. Like, that was the only word that could come to mind to describe this person, like someone whose brain has just been totally poisoned by this ideology. It was almost like a religious intensity to him when it came to his political views. So that all left me quite concerned. But he wasn't peppering me with questions a ton. He mostly seemed concerned about, if I had access to guns, and whether or not I could get access to guns, and whether, when I would be available to commence paramilitary training in Manitoba. So those were most of the questions he was posing to me.
Hey, Ryan, another follow-up to the base. I know they're kind of really focusing on the base a lot, but
yeah,
it just seemed to be really intriguing, especially with how you went about it. Do you feel like inadvertently, because of you kind of exposing them, you've kind of inadvertently made future investigative journalists kind of like a bit more difficult to infiltrate these types of groups? Do you feel like it's kind of had like a bit of a shockwave effect where it's like now they're going to kind of be a bit more wary about who they're letting in and who they're recruiting? And do you think that is just going to be more difficult, or do you feel like they're still kind of too dumb for that?
Yeah, so I mean, if they're smart, they'll up their vetting protocols, right? I mean, the base at this point, I think it's almost a non-entity. There's 8 members arrested in the United States. Like Mathews and his co-conspirator just got sentenced to 9 years. Another individual, William Bilbrough, got 5 years. I think there's a fourth named Richard Tobin, who I don't know if he's been adjudicated yet. And then there's a trio down in Floyd County, Georgia, who are, in my mind, the scariest of the bunch. It was disturbing the degree to which they had planned out this double murder they're accused of plotting in detail. But I mean, if the prosecution proves the case on that one, I imagine they get 20, 25 years. So I think that this organization has been dismantled in the United States. So I don't think anyone's going to be needing to infiltrate them anytime soon. But the ideology that gave rise to this movement is alive and well. There are other members who were in the base who still hold those views, who have likely just splintered off and are going to resurface in other organizations. There's groups like Atomoff and Division, who I think rebranded as National Socialist Order. But yeah, I think it might make it more difficult for other journalists to potentially infiltrate these organizations. That's a possibility. I think it's also going to make it more difficult for these organizations to recruit in general, because it's up their level of suspicion, where now any potential comrade is also a potential reporter or a federal agent or something. And so I think it's likely going to kind of heighten the paranoia and suspicion among them. But it wasn't really a consideration for me as a reporter. Like at the time, I wasn't sitting there thinking, well, if I do this and publish it, is it going to make it more difficult for some theoretical investigative journalist to do the same thing down the line? I mean, from my standpoint, it wasn't really my concern. And, because I was doing it then and there, and it was just a question of getting to the bottom of the story. And in some way, it might be inevitable, if you do infiltrate an organization like this and then report it out publicly, which is the whole point of infiltrating it in the first place. It might be inevitable that you make it more difficult for journalists who are kind of trying to do the same work down the line. But I don't really see a way to avoid that, to be honest.
In terms of your other stories, like your Peter Nygard piece, I know there was so many rumblings of his misconduct before, and then also when this was unfolding, there was a lot of eyes on it, and obviously like a lot of journalists. What angle did you take in that to kind of make your investigation stand out?
Yeah, I mean, one thing was that from our standpoint, it was a Winnipeg story. Peter Nygard started his business here. He turned it into like a multi-million-dollar empire here. He was a very prominent person in this community. And there had been past accusations. He had been charged in 1980 with rape, but then the case fell apart because the alleged victim didn't want to testify at trial. There had been a series of complaints to the Manitoba Human Rights Commission in 1996 that went on to lead to out-of-court settlements. And there was just stories. Like, it was probably 6 months after I moved to Winnipeg and started working at the paper that I probably first heard from a colleague, like, oh yeah, he's a creep, or like, oh, there's all of these rumors and stuff. But I think in the Nygard stuff, one thing that aided me was that there was a lot of Winnipeg victims. And so it was easier for me to get connected with Winnipeg victims, particularly after I start reporting on this. And then again, it's just one of those things where people who had stories started reaching out to me. So because I'm established in Winnipeg, that was helpful. I also think it was helpful because down in the Bahamas, there was this whole kind of subplot about this feud with his neighbor, Louis Bacon. And Peter Nygard's go-to defense was, oh, this is all trumped up. These are all Louis Bacon's paying women to lie and things like that. And it's accusation and counter accusation. And it was a lot to try and get to the bottom of. But I know that feud, and the New York Times did some reporting on this, and I love the New York Times, but quite frankly, I think they missed the forest for the trees because they focused entirely on the neighbor feud as opposed to the sexual assaults. And one reason I think that I wasn't as distracted by the neighbor feud as some other reporters was that this feud dated to about 2008, but I had spoken to a woman who said that she went on a date with Peter Nygard in the late 1950s when they were in high school and he sexually assaulted her. So, and I had claims from the 1970s, and I had, claims in Winnipeg, women who were disconnected from this feud in the Bahamas. So it was much easier for me to kind of not get distracted by that, I think, because of that background. And then, it's also kind of an example of, I think, of like, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes. Like, my newspaper flew me out to New York City, and my first morning in the city happened to be the day the FBI raided Peter Nygard's headquarters in Times Square. So I just happened to be there on that day. So it just, that was a stroke of luck. And because I was in New York City, and I was going around to all these law firms and like trying to talk to people, that I was able to develop some sources who are connected to various different aspects of this case, so that when I flew down to the Bahamas, they were able to connect me with victims and women who had stories to tell. And I mean, those were the worst interviews, like the most grueling interviews I've done in my life. It was just like day after day, for about a week of just horrific interviews with these women. But yeah, I mean, it was a degree of luck in the sense of being in New York City when I was there. It was a degree of, I think, good source work, making connections with people who were able to connect me with other people. And then it was also just by virtue of the fact that I'm Winnipeg based and Peter Nygard was Winnipeg based. And so I was able to access, people who had known him for a very long time. And also I was able to unearth, allegations that stemmed back decades and decades, which helped me not get distracted by this whole feud with his neighbor that I really think the New York Times kind of got distracted with.
Hey, I had a question back to the previous case we were talking about. So I think you're probably not going to be going undercover in a neo-Nazi group anytime soon. Yeah. But going through that, did that spark an interest in you in like the danger of these right-wing extremist groups, like maybe it's something like the Proud Boys or other like neo-Nazi adjacent groups? And is that something you're going to continue to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, since I first broke this story, I kind of fell down the rabbit hole into this world a little bit. I've got, probably about 12 to 15 different books on kind of right-wing extremism by this point, ranging from like the texts written by Nazis that they consider important to like academic studies of these movements. And very early on, after the Mathews story broke, I had a literary agent reach out to me. I've had some publishers reach out to me. So I hope to do a book now that the podcast is out, now that the case is done. I hope to write a book which would essentially try and use the Mathews case and the kind of first person account of me infiltrating this group to discuss the issues more broadly, to discuss kind of just the far right ecosystem these days, particularly in Canada. The last like non-academic book we had on this topic was like 94, Warren Sinkella's Web of Hate. So I think that it's time for like a new accounting of the movement here. I think, we're living in an age of increased political polarization, and liberal democratic societies are coming under increasing internal and in some cases external threats. So I think that it's definitely something I'm interested in, that I've been reading a lot about, I've been trying to do a lot of research into, and that I hope to cover in more in depth in the book I want to write. I mean, it's not, I work for a regional newspaper, so it's not going to be like a main focus of my newspaper work or anything like that. But, I also have personal projects that personal writing projects that I work on in my spare time. So I plan to pursue it there.
Maybe just one question, kind of drawing back to your talking about the New York Times and their kind of not really seeing, kind of going forest for the trees, right? And you talked about the cardinal sins of journalism previously. What would you say are those cardinal sins of journalism, and why do you think reporters get caught up in looking at potentially the wrong aspect of a story?
Yeah, I wouldn't say what the Times did in that story was a cardinal sin. I mean, the two reporters on that file, Catherine Porter and Kim Barker, I mean, they're very well-established, well-respected reporters. They're more well-respected, than I am, and have had more success. Kim Barker, I own one of her books. So I have respect for them. And this is just, like one man's opinion, right? But like, given I know a lot about the Peter Nygard case, I probably know more about it than like, most people, than perhaps maybe even like a handful of like law enforcement and legal teams that have been on this. And I think that they botched that one. And from what I was told, they botched it because Peter Nygard's legal team put some serious pressure on the Times to have that story rewritten in the run up to publication, which was bizarre to me, because it's like, if anyone can afford to fight something in court, it's the New York Times. They're rolling in money. So, but editorial decisions were made. I don't know all the reasons those decisions were made, but I didn't agree with them. And in terms of the cardinal sins of journalism, the two big ones are fabrication and plagiarism. You can't fabricate and you can't plagiarize. And quite frankly, I think anyone who gets caught doing those things should be shit canned immediately and blacklisted from the industry. I think you have to treat those things like very seriously. And then other than that, I mean, maybe there are some more if I sat here long enough to think about it, but those are the two main ones, fabulous like Stephen Glass or Jason Blair. Those people deserve to lose their jobs and be ostracized. And plagiarism, there's been some plagiarism cases in recent years where the people haven't really been ostracized or lost their jobs. I think that they probably should. Don't get to rip off other writers. And then, I don't know. Other than that, it's like every reporter is going to make mistakes, right? It comes with the territory, it comes with the nature of the job and how quickly stories come together. And the only thing that really matters, I mean, it would be one thing if it's like a serious mistake and you're, I mean, you can get sued, if it's libel. But in my mind, the main thing is just to own up to it. You know, it's going to happen. I think I've had to print maybe 1 or 2 corrections in my career. And by corrections, I mean, like, we actually had to run something in the following day's newspaper saying, like, you know, in yesterday's edition of the paper on this page, we said this is actually the truth. We apologize for the error. Other times you'll have kind of very minor things, or maybe they get updated online. But the key is just to be transparent about it. It's going to happen. I actually think it can increase the respect of your readers if you do it in a transparent way and you just own up and apologize it. And so whenever something happens like that, like even a small example, you know, there have been a couple of times where I've tweeted something out that was wrong. And so what I would do is I would screenshot the bad tweet. I would delete it so it's no longer out there circulating around. I would fix it in a subsequent tweet, and then I would start a 2-tweet thread where underneath I would just post the original screenshot and say, hey, for the sake of transparency, this is what I initially said. I deleted it because it's wrong. My apologies, but this is so you're correcting the record in a very transparent way, and you're owning up to it. And I think that, you know, people can see that and they realize, like, oh, this is someone who's trying to get it right. And when they don't get it right, they're being upfront about it, and it can actually increase your credibility.
Whom do you look up to as an investigative journalist?
Yeah, I mean, the big one for me is Seymour Hersh. If I had a Mount Rushmore of journalists, Seymour Hersh would be on it. I mean, investigative reporters are always going to come under fire and get under criticism. He's very old now, and there's been some claims about some of his later work and whether or not it's up to par with a lot of his earlier stuff. I can't say one way or the other, but, you know, the work he did when he was in his prime was, you know, absolutely incredible. You know, in the Canadian context, someone like Robin Doolittle at the Globe and Mail has done some very incredible investigative work over the years. A guy I love in Canada is Tom Cardazzo, also at the Globe and Mail. And every journalist is going to have different skill sets. I think that, you know, one thing is, like, I think that I'm a good writer and I have chops as a writer. And I also think I'm a good reporter. And sometimes you'll see some folks in the industry and they're really good reporters, but they're not that good of writers or whatever. But Tom Cardazzo is like the triple threat, because, like, he's a good writer, he's a good reporter, and he's also like a data guy. And so he can just do everything across the board. And his work, in my mind, is always of a very high level. Michael Schmidt at the New York Times, I remember liking a bunch of his stuff when I was following it a couple years ago. This isn't, I mean, I suppose it's investigative reporting in a way. It's also long form. He only does books these days, but Alex Kotlowitz is a really remarkable journalist based out of Chicago, and is also someone I know that teaches journalism out there. He used to be a feature writer at the Wall Street Journal. Eventually, he's done a couple of really big books that I really admire. And he's also just a very nice guy, because I was doing a project that was kind of inspired by one of his projects. And I just reached out to him through his website, and he ended up speaking to me on the phone for like an hour and a half and walking me through various things. So Alex Kotlowitz is another name. Jill Leovy used to be at the Los Angeles Times. She's quite good. So yeah, those are a few that come to mind.
It feels, Ryan, as though the students are have so much to think about because of what you've done today, and we're reaching the end of the time allotted for the class. I want to take a moment to thank you, but I did want to ask you one question. and that is, before I thank you, and I will thank you, is, with the Nygaard story and your other work, are there risks of libel that you've been dealing with?
I've received legal threats throughout my career. Some of my early work at the newspaper in 2018, which took a bit of a run at the local firefighters union. The local fire boss in Winnipeg he's got a reputation for being quite litigious. And so it got to a point where I would call him up and ask him for comment, and he would just threaten to sue me. He never did. And we have a legal team at the Winnipeg Free Press. We've got seasoned editors, and we've also got lawyers on file who can vet things if need be. Nygaard's team sometimes, they would kind of make vague insinuations towards lawsuits. I didn't ever consider it a serious possibility because they had such bigger fish to fry at that point in time. The New York Times was reporting on this. I think we would have been far down on their list if they wanted to file something. And we also felt very strongly that our work was solid and would withstand litigation. I've only been sued once in my career, and it was by like a local guy who's a diagnosed schizophrenic. It was quite sad. He sued like 5 different institutions. It was like the Winnipeg Sun, the Winnipeg Free Press, the mayor, the Winnipeg Police Service, all in cahoots in some grand conspiracy to, I can't even remember what the claim was, but it was, immediately dismissed or pretty quickly dismissed by the courts. So that was the only time I've ever been subject to litigation. It was entirely meritless. And then, there are other times where people have threatened to sue me over some of the investigative work I've done. But, that's just where it's important to be working with a good editor to make sure you have your facts in order, to take the time to double, triple check everything. And then also if it's a serious enough case and you're at a publication that has lawyers on file, get the story lawyered before you go to print so that they can sign off on it.
Ryan, the book, your book on extremists in Canada is already attracting publishers, which is always a good sign. But are you going to be able to, how are you going to find the time and the money to work on a book like that?
Well, I'd mentioned before that I got into journalism because I thought it might be a way to pay my bills when I wrote fiction. So I've written a couple unpublished novels since I've worked in journalism, and it just involves waking up at 6 a.m. and writing for a few hours before you start your work day. So I'm not worried about the actual writing process because I'm fairly disciplined as a writer and have an ability to stick to a schedule and carve out several hours a day. So yeah, in terms of time, and I don't think I'll have too much of an issue. And then the other thing that's good is like most of the work's already done. I've been chasing and reporting the story for the past 2 years. So at this point, there's not a ton of legwork that needs still to be done. I mean, there's a bit, but not a ton. I don't think it would be overly cost prohibitive.
Ryan, how great do you think the threat of racism and extremism is now to Canada?
Well, we have seen in the past couple of years, like events like I think it was 2017 Quebec City Mosque shooting. We saw the London van attack in this year. There was the Toronto van attack. The thing that's interesting about the kind of far right nowadays, at least the sections of it that I infiltrated, is it's not like the Heritage Front in the 1990s where they're essentially trying to build like a large political movement. These people have largely rejected kind of traditional politics of that nature. They're mostly interested in creating like 2 to 3 man cells that can kind of operate in the shadows scattered across the country. And so that in some sense that makes it, I mean, it's a conscious strategy of theirs called leaderless resistance. And it makes them, I think, more dangerous because it's much harder to identify them when you just have one individual alone or 1 or 2 people working in concert. So I think we've seen the threat is quite high in the sense that, these people have caused bloodshed in this country. Sadly, I think it'll probably happen again. And I think the movement's somewhat growing. The best research we have comes from Barbara Perry, an academic out of Ontario who's charted the growth of far-right organizations in Canada in the past 4 or 5 years. And there's been a noted uptick in the amount of groups operating. So yeah, I think it is a threat. You don't want to engage in threat inflation. You don't want to blow it out of proportion, but it's something I think most Canadians isn't on their radar, but I do think it's a cause for concern.
Ryan, we've reached the end of our allotted time. So I want to thank you. I think we've all heard what a thoughtful and uncompromising journalist you are. It seems like you've crammed a lifetime of experience in journalism into only a few years. You're so articulate about talking to these things. It's wonderful to listen to you. So I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, no, by all means, Shawn. Thank you for the invitation. I love kind of nerding out about journalism topics, so it was my pleasure.
Okay, maybe we can back you back again sometime. Just a quick question to clean up, Ryan. I did send an email earlier asking if I could record you, and if I can record you, if you had any restrictions. We haven't talked since then. I did record this, but retroactively, I want to see whether you're okay with this recording, if you have any restrictions.
Well, as a reporter, I know Canada's one-party consent, so technically you're legally in the clear to record me without me knowing. But yeah, no, I'm fine. I don't mind it being recorded, and I don't have any restrictions.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We want to be as ethical as we can, and and you appreciate that. So thanks again, Ryan. I know that I think you've really given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.